I never thought my 35th wedding anniversary would be the day I discovered just how little I knew about the man I'd married. The champagne flutes were already arranged on the dining room table when I came downstairs that Saturday morning. Richard had insisted on hosting the celebration at our home in Oakville, the same house we'd bought when we moved to Ontario 3 decades ago. Back then, it was just a modest 2-bedroom starter home. Now, after years of renovations I'd overseen while Richard focused on his career, it was worth well over $1 million. "Margaret, have you called the caterers?" Richard asked without looking up from his phone. He was sitting at the kitchen island, still in his golf clothes from his morning round. At 62, my husband had developed the kind of soft middle that comes from too many business lunches and not enough activity beyond his weekly 18 holes. "They'll be here at 4, I said, pouring myself a coffee. "Everything's arranged." "Good, good." He scrolled through his phone, his reading glasses sliding down his nose. "We need this to be perfect. The Hendersons are coming, and Jim just made partner at his firm." I'd noticed that about Richard lately. Every conversation somehow circled back to someone else's success, someone else's achievement. After 35 years of marriage, I'd learned to read the signs. He was restless, dissatisfied, looking for something. I just didn't know what until that afternoon. The caterers arrived promptly at 4, and by 5:30 our living room was filled with neighbors, colleagues, and friends. My sister Dorothy had driven up from Toronto with her husband. Richard's brother James came with his wife Patricia. Everyone kept commenting on how wonderful we looked together, how lucky we were to have made it this far. If only they knew. I was in the kitchen arranging dessert plates when I heard raised voices from Richard's study. The door was slightly ajar. I shouldn't have eavesdropped, but something in his tone made me pause. "I can't keep doing this, Denise. She's going to find out eventually." My hand froze on the dessert plate. "Denise? Denise Morrison from his office? Just wait until after tonight," a woman's voice responded. I could hear her clearly through his speakerphone. "Once the party's over, you can tell her everything. We've waited this long." I know. But looking at her today, playing the happy couple, it's exhausting. My heart hammered against my ribs. 35 years. 35 years. And this was what he thought of our marriage? Exhausting? "Richard, you promised me. After the anniversary party, you'd ask her for a divorce. We can finally be together." "I'm not getting any younger, and neither are you." I gripped the counter to steady myself. Divorce. He was planning to divorce me. At our anniversary party, "You're right," Richard said, his voice softening in a way it hadn't for me in years. "After tonight, I promise. I've already spoken to Daniel about the financial arrangements." "Daniel," his lawyer. My stomach turned. "What about the house?" Denise asked. "She'll have to sell it. We'll split the proceeds, obviously, but with my pension and the investments, I'll have enough to buy us that condo downtown you liked, the one with the lake view. Our house. The house I'd turned into a home. The house where I'd raised our daughter Bethany. The house I'd spent countless hours renovating, decorating, maintaining while Richard worked late nights at the office. Apparently, with Denise, "I can't wait," Denise purred. "Imagine waking up together every morning. No more sneaking around." "Soon, darling. Very soon." I backed away from the study, my mind racing. I needed to think. I needed to plan. But first, I needed to get through this party without revealing that I knew everything. The next 2 hours were torture. I smiled, I laughed, I accepted congratulations and well wishes. Richard gave a speech about our wonderful journey together and many more years to come. I had to excuse myself to the bathroom to keep from being sick. Around 8 o'clock, I noticed Richard checking his watch repeatedly. He was waiting for the party to end, waiting to drop his bomb. But I had other plans. I'd spent the past 2 hours thinking, calculating, remembering, and I'd realized something crucial. Richard had made a terrible mistake. When we bought this house 35 years ago, Richard had just started his job at Morrison & Associates. Yes, the same Morrison as Denise. He had no credit, having just emerged from business school with substantial debt. The down payment came entirely from my inheritance when my father passed away. The mortgage was in my name only. Every renovation, every improvement, every mortgage payment over the years had come from our joint account. Yes, but the title? The title had always been solely in my name. Richard had conveniently forgotten this detail. Or perhaps he'd never paid attention in the first place. I'd also been the one managing our finances for the past decade. Richard was too busy with work, he'd said, too stressed to deal with bills and accounts, so I'd handled everything. The investment accounts, the retirement funds, the savings. I knew exactly where every penny was, and I knew exactly what I was entitled to. As the last guests were preparing to leave, I made my decision. "Before everyone goes," I said, my voice cutting through the chatter, "I'd like to say a few words." Richard looked startled. We hadn't planned for me to give a speech, but he smiled encouragingly, probably thinking I was going to deliver some sentimental reflection on our marriage. 35 years ago, I began, accepting a glass of champagne from the table. I married a man I thought I knew. I worked as a nurse while he built his career. I managed our home, raised our daughter, and supported every decision he made. I trusted him completely. Dorothy gave me a curious look. She knew me well enough to sense something was off. I put my father's inheritance into buying our first home. I managed our finances, our investments, our future. I did this because I believed we were partners. I believed we were building something together. Richard's smile was starting to falter. "Margaret, darling, perhaps." "I'm not finished," I said calmly. "This afternoon, I discovered something interesting. I discovered that after 35 years of marriage, my husband has been having an affair with his colleague, Denise Morrison. I discovered that he's planning to divorce me. I discovered that he's already spoken to a lawyer about dividing our assets, including selling this house." The room went completely silent. Richard's face turned the color of old newspaper. "Margaret, this is not the time," he started. "This is exactly the time," I interrupted, "because there's something my husband forgot, something rather important." I turned to address our guests, many of whom looked completely shocked. "You see, this house isn't ours. It's mine. The title is in my name only. It's always been in my name only. Every mortgage payment, every renovation, every improvement over 35 years was made to a house that legally belongs solely to me." James, Richard's brother, let out a low whistle. "Richard, is this true?" Richard's mouth opened and closed like a fish. "We can discuss this privately." "We're well past privacy now, don't you think?" I asked. "You were planning to announce this after the party anyway. I'm simply saving you the trouble." I took a sip of champagne. "I've also been reviewing our financial accounts this afternoon. It's amazing what you can accomplish with online banking these days. Our joint investment accounts, the ones I've been managing, I've already contacted our financial advisor to begin separation proceedings. Under Ontario law, I'm entitled to half of your pension, and you're entitled to precisely nothing from my inheritance-funded assets." "You can't do this," Richard said, his voice rising. "We'll go to court. I've given you 35 years. And I gave you 35 years in return," I said. "The difference is, I was faithful. I was honest. I was present. I set down my champagne glass. I've already contacted a lawyer of my own, a very good one. She's reviewed our financial situation and confirmed what I suspected. You're entitled to half of our joint marital assets, Richard. But this house, my inheritance accounts, the investments I made before our marriage, those remain mine." Patricia, James's wife, actually started clapping slowly. "Good for you, Margaret. As for dividing our joint assets," I continued, "I'm more than willing to be fair. But fair means you get exactly what you contributed, not what you assumed you'd take." I looked directly at Richard. "You wanted your freedom? You've got it. You can move in with Denise right now if you like. I'm sure she'll be thrilled to support you while we sort out the legal details." "Margaret, please, can we talk about this rationally?" Richard's voice had taken on a pleading tone I'd never heard before. "I've been nothing but rational," I said. "I've spent the last 2 hours being extremely rational while you smiled and gave speeches about our wonderful marriage. I've been rational while you planned my future without consulting me. I think I've been rational enough for both of us." Dorothy came to stand beside me, putting her arm around my shoulders. "I think it's time for everyone to leave," she announced. "Except you, Richard. You should start packing." The guests filed out quickly, some offering me sympathetic looks, others staring at Richard with barely concealed disgust. The Hendersons left without saying goodbye to anyone. When the door closed behind the last guest, Richard turned to me. His face was red, whether from anger or embarrassment, I couldn't tell. "You've humiliated me," he said. "I've humiliated you?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You were planning to divorce me at our anniversary party, Richard. You've been having an affair with a woman from your office? You were going to force me to sell my home, the home I bought with my father's money, and somehow I've humiliated you?" "We can work this out," he said. "We don't need to involve lawyers. We can be civilized about this." "We're well past civilization," I said. "You made sure of that when you decided to betray me with Denise Morrison. How long has it been going on, Richard? A year? 2? 5? He didn't answer, which told me everything I needed to know. "It doesn't matter," I said. "What matters is that you leave. Tonight, Dorothy and her husband will make sure you pack only what belongs to you. Everything else we'll sort out through our lawyers." "Margaret, please." "Don't." I held up my hand. "Don't say my name like that. Don't pretend you care now. You should have cared 2 years ago, or 5 years ago, or whenever this started. You should have cared enough to be honest with me. You should have cared enough to end our marriage with dignity instead of planning an ambush." He stood there, looking older than his 62 years, his shoulders slumped in defeat. "I never meant to hurt you, but you did," I said simply. "You hurt me terribly. But you know what? You also did me a favor. You showed me that I'm stronger than I thought, that I can stand on my own, that I don't need someone who sees our marriage as exhausting." His eyes widened. He'd forgotten about the phone call I'd overheard. "Get out, Richard. Call Denise. I'm sure she'll be happy to take you in. After all, she's been waiting for this moment." Dorothy and James helped him pack 2 suitcases of clothes. I watched from the bedroom doorway as he gathered his toiletries, his suits, his golf equipment. 35 years of marriage reduced to 2 suitcases and a set of clubs. When he was ready to leave, he paused at the front door. "I hope someday you can forgive me." "I hope someday I can too," I said. "But today is not that day. Goodbye, Richard." The door closed behind him, and I sank onto the couch, the adrenaline finally wearing off. Dorothy sat beside me, holding my hand. "Are you okay?" she asked. "I don't know," I admitted. "Ask me tomorrow." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the evening in my mind, wondering if I'd done the right thing, wondering if I should have handled it differently, wondering what came next. But when morning came, I felt something unexpected: relief. I didn't have to pretend anymore. I didn't have to smile through another dinner where Richard checked his phone constantly. I didn't have to wonder why he worked late so often. I didn't have to question why he'd become so distant, so critical, so absent even when he was present. The next few weeks were a blur of legal consultations and paperwork. My lawyer, Caroline Chen, was exactly what I needed: sharp, thorough, and utterly unsympathetic to Richard's attempts to claim more than he deserved. "Your husband's lawyer is arguing that he contributed to the house through general matrimonial support," Caroline explained during one of our meetings. "But given that the title has always been in your name and the down payment came from your inheritance, his claim is weak. At best, he might be entitled to compensation for improvements made during the marriage, but even that's questionable, given that most renovations were funded through your joint account, to which you contributed equally from your nursing salary." "What about his pension?" I asked. "You're entitled to half of what accumulated during your marriage. Given that he worked for Morrison and Associates for 35 years, that's substantial. Combined with your own nursing pension, you'll be quite comfortable." Comfortable, such a bland word for the financial security I'd worked my entire life to achieve. Richard, it turned out, was not as prepared for divorce as he'd thought. Denise Morrison, when faced with the reality of supporting a man who would lose a significant portion of his assets, suddenly became less enthusiastic about their relationship. I heard through mutual friends that she'd broken things off within a month of Richard moving out. He tried to come back, called me, sent flowers, even showed up at the house one evening looking haggard and remorseful. "I made a terrible mistake," he said through the door. "I'd installed new locks the day after he left. Margaret, please, Can we talk? We can talk through our lawyers, I said. That's the only conversation we need to have. I miss you. I miss our life. You should have thought of that before you decided our life was exhausting, I replied. Goodbye, Richard. The divorce was finalized 6 months later. I kept the house, half his pension, and my dignity. Richard moved into a modest apartment in Burlington, much to the amusement of James, who called me regularly to update me on his brother's increasingly pathetic circumstances. He's asked our mother for money, James told me one afternoon. Can you believe it? At 62 years old, calling Mom asking for a loan, I could believe it. Richard had always been better at spending money than earning it, better at making plans than following through. But I didn't take pleasure in his downfall. I simply felt free. My daughter Bethany came to visit from Vancouver, where she'd moved for work 3 years earlier. She sat in the kitchen, where I'd overheard Richard's phone call, drinking tea and listening to the whole story. Mom, I have to tell you something, she said when I'd finished. I never liked Dad very much. I know I should. He's my father, but he was always so dismissive of you. The way he talked to you, like you were his secretary instead of his wife. I hated it. Why didn't you say anything? I asked. Because you seemed happy. Or at least, I thought you were. Now I realize you were just settling, accepting less than you deserved because you'd been doing it for so long you forgot you had a choice. Her words hit me harder than anything Richard had said. She was right. I had been settling. For years, I'd accepted Richard's indifference, his criticism, his absence. I'd convinced myself that this was just what marriage looked like after 35 years. That the excitement fades, the passion dims, and what remains is obligation and routine. But I'd been wrong. A year after the divorce, I sold the house. It was too big for one person, too full of memories I didn't want to keep. I bought a modern 2-bedroom condo in downtown Toronto, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Ontario. Every morning, I wake up to the sunrise over the water, and I remember that I chose this. I chose this life, this freedom, this peace. I reconnected with old friends from nursing school, women I'd lost touch with over the years. We meet for lunch, go to the theater, take weekend trips to Niagara-on-the-Lake. I joined a book club. I started volunteering at the hospital where I used to work, mentoring young nurses. I even went on a few dates, though nothing serious. At 63, I'm not looking for another husband. I'm looking for myself, the woman I was before I spent 35 years shrinking to fit into someone else's life. Dorothy says I seem younger now than I did at 50. You're actually smiling again, she told me recently. Not that fake smile you used to wear at parties. A real smile. She's right. I am smiling. Because I learned something important that night at my anniversary party. I am not defined by someone else's love or lack thereof. I am not less valuable because my husband chose to betray me. I am not a failure because my marriage ended. I am a woman who worked hard her entire life, who raised a daughter, who built a career, who survived betrayal and came out stronger. I am a woman who refused to be pushed aside quietly, who stood up for herself when it mattered most. I am Margaret Sutherland, and I know my worth. If you're reading this and finding yourself in a similar situation, wondering if you should stay or go, wondering if you're overreacting or being too sensitive, let me tell you what I wish someone had told me years ago. Trust yourself. Trust that quiet voice inside that tells you something isn't right. Trust your instincts when they warn you that you're being taken for granted, taken advantage of, or simply taken for a fool. And remember this, you are never too old to start over. At 63, I rebuilt my entire life. I found joy again. I found peace. I found myself. It won't be easy. There will be nights when you question everything, when you wonder if you made the right choice, when the loneliness feels overwhelming. But those nights pass, and when morning comes, you'll realize that you're still standing, still breathing, still moving forward. Protect yourself financially. I cannot stress this enough. Know where your money is, what assets you have, what you're entitled to. Don't assume your spouse has your best interests at heart, especially if they're planning to leave. Get a good lawyer. Document everything. Be smart about it. And finally, Know that there is life after betrayal. There is happiness after heartbreak. There is love after loss, even if that love is simply learning to love yourself again. I spent 35 years believing my worth was tied to my marriage. I spent 35 years making myself smaller to make my husband feel bigger. I spent 35 years settling for less than I deserved. Not anymore. Now, when I look in the mirror, I see a survivor. I see a woman who refused to be discarded quietly. I see someone who learned that the best revenge isn't bitterness or anger. The best revenge is building a life so full of joy and purpose that you forget to think about the person who tried to tear you down. Richard calls occasionally, usually when he's had too much to drink. I don't answer. There's nothing left to say. Whatever we had died long before our anniversary party. I just didn't know it yet, but now I do. And I'm grateful. Grateful for the strength I didn't know I had. Grateful for the daughter who supports me unconditionally. Grateful for the sister